Hello, this is Angela. In today's video, I'll be talking about the hips and specifically about the hip joint and stiffness in the hip joint area. And I'll also be giving you a few moves that you may want to try to actually help if you are finding yourself impinged by this type of issue. Now, there are a few reasons that contribute to stiffness in the hip joint, and most of it really comes down to movement, either not moving enough or doing the wrong type of movement, or not incorporating a big range of movements into your weekly routine. And as we get older, this is actually going to be more exaggerated as well, unless we are consciously thinking about it and doing the right types of exercises to keep on top of it. It can be due to muscular imbalance as, I guess, a starting point to look at why we might have issues in that area. You know, if we don't have a strong core and posturally we're not set up so that our muscles are correctly balanced, the hips are not going to be sitting in the right place, which means that there will be an element of hindrance in allowing that joint to actually do what it's intended to do. It could be due to having the wrong type of footwear. If we're wearing heels, we're tilting our pelvis in the process, you know, to actually try and adjust us so that we're upright. And that also means that that joint is not in its intended position. That'll limit us as well. It could be due to the fact that we're just wearing tight shoes, or we're just wearing shoes where our toes can't splay out. And over time, that also means that we're just setting the wrong, I guess, messages up into our body, and the pelvis is trying to auto-adjust for it, and thus contributing to less than optimal functioning right through that hip joint as well. But what these come down to essentially is what's happening in the actual joint. And if you think of the hip joint, it is what we call a synovial joint, which means that it doesn't just go forward and back like the knee would or the elbow in one position. It can do circular movements like our wrists or our ankles. So it has lots of different planes of movement, up, down, around and around. And what we have in that joint is what we call a synovial membrane, which is the area that the joint sits in. And this synovial membrane actually creates synovial fluid. And this is what allows the joint to splash around a little bit and stay lubricated. So think of it, it's almost as if we're creating an oily environment for that joint, so there's no friction when it moves. So essentially what happens with our different body imbalances or not moving enough, we're not getting enough production of the synovial fluid. Synovial fluid is created directly in response to movement in our body. If we're not moving enough, we don't create the synovial fluid. But then what happens as well, if we're not moving in a range of planes around, we'll find that there are parts in that synovial joint which are more fluid than others. So as we stop using our legs in a certain direction, moving in a certain direction, we'll also find that we become stiffer there because there's just not as much grease in that part of the joint. So let's get down on the floor, and I'll run through with you a few moves that you can do to actually help you to start to get a little bit more gentle movement in that part of the body as well. But the best thing you can do is really just try and reassess types of movements that you do on a day-to-day basis. Perhaps starting the day with doing some of these mobility drills that I'll be giving you to get that fluid moving through that area, and just looking at what types of exercises you do, or creating a bit more diversity in your exercise so that you're not setting yourself up to just favor a certain type of movement over others. Come and join me on the mat. We're going to start by lying down on our back, and for this one, just set yourself up so that your feet are flat on the floor, perhaps a little bit wider than hip distance apart from each other. Just take those arms out to the side. Make sure your spine's in that neutral position to start with. And from here, as we breathe in, we're going to take both knees over to one side. So you're feeling a stretch right through the front of the side of the thigh and into the pelvis. And then back up, knees pointing at the ceiling, and then over to the other side. From here, we're going to take one leg, cross it over on top of the other leg, and just pull the other leg in towards us. So we call this a figure 4 stretch. And you should be feeling a stretch right into the glute of the leg that's closest to you. If you're finding that it's really hard to actually reach through the legs and you're feeling that you have to lift your head to get there, just don't worry about using the arms. Just keep your head on the floor. You just keep those hands down and just use that back leg, the power in that back leg, to bring you a little bit closer in. We're now going into a hamstring stretch. For this one, it's taking one leg up towards the ceiling and pulling it in towards you. If you can reach comfortably, you can also use your hands just to give you that little bit of extra range. There are a few things you can do for this one. If you have a band, one of those rubber resistance bands, you can place it around the outside of your sole, pull it back in with both hands just to give you that little bit of extra stretch. You can also straighten down that bottom leg as well, which also gives you a stretch through the front of the quad and the hip flexors on the other side too. Over into a seated position, and we're going to do a butterfly stretch now. So this really gets into the inside of the thighs. So having both the soles of both feet towards each other, and there, if you can, just pulling your knees downwards with your elbows or your hands. Now this can be quite uncomfortable for many people. If it is so, you may want to just do one leg at a time, where you're straightening one leg out, bending the other leg in, and then just bringing your weight down either towards the center or towards the straight leg. For this one, we're going to be working through the quad to start off with. So setting yourself up so that you've got one knee down on the floor, the other one in front, and just bringing the opposite down towards the floor, or you can actually just rest it on your thigh if you wish in this position. So we're working into the quad here, trying to get a stretch through that area. Now, to make this a little bit more intense and to also go into the hip flexor a little bit more, which is an important part of our pelvis, bring yourself back up into an upright position, tuck that pelvis under, and then bring yourself forward again, this time keeping your body completely upright. So this way we're actually getting into the hip flexor a lot more deeply. So from here now we're going to do just a couple of mobility exercises. The first one we're actually going to do down on our hands and knees, and we call this one hydrant because, well, I'll let you decide why we call it hydrant. Set yourself up, core is gently switched on. We're going to lift one leg off the floor and we're going to do hip circles with that leg. Now this is an area where if you do have stiffness through the hips, you might find this a little bit uncomfortable to start with, but with practice it gets a lot easier. So just making it a lot bigger, trying to put as much range of movement in this as you possibly can. You can also do this with your hands, with your wrists resting, and just resting on your forearm and your elbows. Okay. Okay, and now we're going to do a very similar exercise to that, but we're actually going to do it lying down on our back. And this is single leg circles. So for this one, you can also do it with a band if you have one, placed around the outside of your foot. And make sure you're keeping that core switched on and you're not rotating at the waist. So all the rotation is in the hip. So we're just doing big circles with this leg. So see if you can keep the knee and the toe pointing outwards. Helps to get just that little bit more range through the body. Again, in this position, your core is working quite hard to stabilize you. And you may find you need to start by doing small circles, and with practice you make the circles bigger. And in theory, you should be feeling a lot less stiff through the hips now by having done that. Thanks so much for joining me. Please don't hesitate to send me a message, contact me if you'd like some more information. And please, if you haven't done so, subscribe below. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.